So next week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, my name is Todd, and with me is...
I don't like that either. That's uncomfortable. Look at that.
I'm just going to...
Judgmental hand.
This guy. No. It's the hands of welcome.
Anyways, so happy to be with you this afternoon.
We're happy to be here.
What a day.
Yeah. Or it could be morning again, because nobody knows what time it is.
It is the afternoon.
It is the afternoon. All right. So we are post-Easter, but we carry Easter with us throughout the year, right?
Yes, indeed we do.
You did say he is risen 1 week later.
I was on the fence about how they were going to respond to that.
I was wondering if you were going to specifically call me out on that, like mention that since I did my thing on Facebook. If you were going to say he is risen. Did you get that, Todd?
I should have done that.
You should have done that. We have a new series. Therefore, what to do with the eyewitness accounts.
Yep.
Okay. Therefore is sort of a formal word. I changed it to so ... Yeah.
Yeah.
You like that?
That's good. I can hang with that.
All right. Women at the tomb. Mark 16 verses 1-8.
Yeah.
And your big idea. Belief in the resurrection is hard, but it is expected.
Yeah. I think I changed it. Let me just strip this glorious moment from you. I changed it in real time to anything but easy, or isn't easy, I think is what I said.
No, it was.
No, I made reference to the hard, but I didn't like the way that it was.
Well, you also
worded.
added, it is absolutely expected.
Yeah, I didn't add that. I just said it.
Well, but it has an emphasis to it.
An emphatic push.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. But let me start there because, and you and I discuss this a lot, and the challenge for a preacher to talk to an audience that is very diverse in terms of their knowledge of Scripture, prior time in a worship setting, that sort of thing. You could literally have someone who has never heard this story before.
Sure.
And you could have somebody who has probably heard a sermon about this 100 times and may have been fairly similar sermons, right?
Maybe, yeah.
And not even just this particular content, but just sort of, we'll say, Christian themes in general.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
10 Commandment type stuff, love your neighbor, general teachings of Jesus, things that they've heard over and over and over again. So I was going to ask you, because you said, again, the belief in the resurrection is hard, but is expected. What do you say to the churchgoer who says, well, that's not hard. I'm all in. I'm down. I believe in the resurrection. Why are you saying it's hard? You're talking about those other people, right? Those other people. Are you talking about those other people, or is the person that sit there and says, no, it's not hard? Have they sort of lost their awe in the moment and the, sort of the amazement of this? Or are they sort of, do they disbelieve in other ways?
Yeah. So I would say really quick, categorically, maybe there's, for kicks, we'll just say there's 3 people out there, okay? There are people that maybe genuinely, by God's grace, it isn't hard. I would say that is a very small sliver of the pie. Really small group of people that legitimately do faithfully believe, trust it, bank their lives on it, and it is not hard for them. I think those people do exist. I think second category would be that there are people who can say, oh, it's not hard. I do believe it. And they are probably a larger category of people who are simply saying, because I've heard it, I can affirm that as factual because I've chosen to believe kind of the data that's been passed to me from wherever it's come, that I can affirm that that's what the story says, so therefore that's true. That category, I think, makes up the bulk majority of just about everybody. And then there is another even smaller group of people who ask a question instead with, well, what do you mean by believe? And I'm actually really, really interested in that small third category, because that is how you get to the bottom of where the problem is with all this. This isn't an issue of, as I said before, your ability to be able to affirm facts, right? Firm information. That does not mean you believe. Todd Pfeiffer said, hey man, I believe you love that shirt, and the data is just that I wear this shirt all the time. That doesn't mean I actually love it. That could very well mean that that's the only shirt I have. Like, I don't do laundry very often. Just because you see something or experience something and can affirm it as true doesn't mean you believe it. Belief changes the person who claims it, right? So the better question I think would be to ask, okay, if you believe it, quote unquote, and it's not hard for you, I would ask that person to tell me what it means for them to believe and how do they know that they do. So let's say someone flipped that question back at you, Todd Pfeiffer. What would you say in light of that? What does it mean to believe in the resurrection? Like in real time, boots on the ground, 2023. What does it mean to believe it? You tell me.
And that's also why I'm your host, because you know that I will always ask you those questions.
For sure. I'm not saying you're making a mistake. I'm just saying.
And I would answer that question as belief means that I am all in on the ramifications of that event, because it isn't just a historical event. It's not about me just acknowledging that it happened. It's the therefore.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Jesus rose from the dead. That's kind of a big deal. And if I don't order my entire life around that, then me simply acknowledging that a historical event occurred is fairly meaningless.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. I can acknowledge all sorts of historical events that I just don't care about.
Sure.
And I have not made ideological, worldview, lifestyle decisions based around.
So I would then say, if someone said, yes, I believe it, that's not hard, I'd question whether or not they actually buy it.
Okay.
Because the ramifications, as we both can agree, are very hard.
So that segues nicely. Well done. Or maybe it's me. Yeah,
I try.
Both of us. Into the first point, which is belief expects devotion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, devotion's an interesting word. And I was thinking about this today because, I know this, you're very excited about this, but the NHL hockey playoffs are starting, right?
You've got me pegged.
That's right. I will categorize myself as a fan of the Seattle Kraken, the fairly new franchise, only because they are from Seattle, my hometown. They're a playoff team, yay, in their second year.
So you're not a fan because you do recognize that the NHL is a garbage.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. What I will say is, and I will admit, I am not a devoted fan. I have not dedicated a lot of time to following them on a regular basis, to learning all the names of the players, to really understanding the game that I didn't really grow up with,
mm-hmm.
and really sort of, attuning myself to their things. I'm kind of a casual fan, right?
Okay.
So I'll connect that back here and say, what is devotion then for a Christian? Because I could say that someone would say that they're devoted when they're like consistent, right? They come every week.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't missed a Sunday, they've only missed a handful of Sundays and they were super sick, that sort of thing. So what does devotion look like that isn't, say, legalistic, that just sort of measures it in cursory stuff like I show up for worship, or I tithe, or I don't say certain things, or whatever?
Yeah. It's actually pretty simple. The difference between devotion and legalism is all in what it intends to accomplish. So legalism is I'm doing, or I'm committed, or I'm filling in, all the gaps so that something happens. Devotion is something has happened, therefore I see no other way to live but devotedly committed, etc. Right? So if someone says, hey, I'm here at church, for example, whenever the doors are open, not because this earns me anything or because this is just sort of what we're supposed to do, but because from the bottom of my heart, I don't want to be about anything else. I want to be around God's people. I want to love them. I want to serve them. I want to offer my life to them. I want to encourage them. And that's all I want to do because Jesus has done so much remarkably more than I could ask or imagine for me. That's devotion. Those women going to see about Jesus' body, if you read those first few verses, they're pretty clear. They're convinced he's dead. Okay, so this isn't an issue of they're even showing up at the tomb to see if he did in fact raise or not. They're not able to put that together yet. They're showing up because his body was quickly embalmed and wrapped up. And that seemed wrong for all that he was to them. For them, he was the one that, released them from spiritual oppression and all the demons for Mary Magdalene, right? For the others, he'd given them dignity and value and worth in a way that no one has ever before. So even if he didn't rise from the grave, right? Even if that wasn't the case, they were so committed to him that it made sense for their own safety on their line, their own money out of pocket, to go back and properly bury him right. That's devotion. Not because this was going to earn him anything, but because he had made such an impact in their life already.
But there is still always a risk, because you talked about, people that, they're there every time the doors are open and they want to be part of God's people, that sort of thing. There is still a risk that still becomes just routine, right?
I don't think routines is an issue. You made the right sort of statement with regards to legalism or not, right? Like if we're doing this because this must be in order for right and good and glorious things to happen, that's a problem.
Sure.
But if someone says, no, this is a rhythm I have disciplined into my life because I love Jesus for what he's done for me, that's still devotion.
Sure. But I always wonder sometimes about, like, are you choosing this over something else, or are you choosing this because this is just kind of what you do? Because, like, if I said, I think we saw this a little bit during COVID when people weren't gathering, right?
Yeah.
People didn't know what to do with themselves.
Yeah, that's fair.
And it was like, well, I don't know how to worship without this group of people in this building. And I can understand missing a community, but there was part of me that was like, what do you do the rest of the week?
Yeah.
I don't spend all of my time when I'm talking to God. I don't have to go to the box with the roof on it to do that. I can talk to God anywhere. I can listen to music anywhere. I can read his word anywhere. Still enjoy that. But I wonder sometimes if the devotion is still sort of seen through the lens of activities, as opposed to being wholly committed and asking the question, am I continually being changed? Do I get excited about gathering versus, I don't know what else I'd do on a Sunday morning if I wasn't going to, say, worship service. So
yeah, and we run the risk of that.
We do.
Yeah.
So that brings us to point number 2. Belief expects discipline. And again, you were talking about the women going to the tomb, the fact that they didn't really know how this was going to get done, right? Because there was the very real possibility that he was inside the tomb and there was a giant stone and there was no way they were going to move it. And so on a practical level, it was kind of you look at it as saying, why are you bothering, right? The devotion, we can say, oh, that's cool, you're so devoted. But then you'd also, part of your brain would want to say, yeah, but go be devoted in a way that is productive.
Yep. I
right?
agree.
But I want to ask the question that, have we kind of lost our courage to just do some crazy stuff? And that's not crazy. They're doing something that's sort of routine and yet is devoted, right? But they're also saying, look, we're going to go do something and I don't know how it's going to get done, right? Are we too calculated as a church, whether it's local or just church universal, in terms of our risk management before we say, we're just going to go and just see how it goes and trust? We say the phrase, God will provide.
Yeah.
Right. It's a little cliche.
I'm about to say, more often than not, we say that backed up against the very real possibility that it's going to be fine.
Right.
Very rarely do people say, God's going to provide, and they step out into the great unknown, right? It's usually a pretty safe environment we're in. And to answer your question, yes. You are barking up my tree all day long when you say that. Like, yes, you know how I feel. And this isn't pointing a finger at any one person, because I don't frankly know what anybody is or is not doing on a daily basis, or the ways in which they're extending a genuine measure of faith in accordance to what God has given them. I don't know. But I would say that we are not marked, particularly in America, nearly like history past, with men and women who threw everything on the line and ran the gauntlet of faith saying, Christ is enough and he will accomplish because he has called us to it. Whether we lose life or limb or home or freedom, doesn't matter. Like those days are long gone. We speak of them, we quote them, we look back to them, as opposed to seeing them in our midst. So yeah, I think that's I hate to call it a lost art, but I think that kind of faithfulness and that kind of adventurous spirit of going into the extents of the world where God has called us, I think that's lost on a lot of us these days.
So I'll segue straight into the third point, because that relates to what you're talking about. Belief expects declaration, right? And you mentioned the sense of numbness, right?
Yeah.
And so the question is, how do we assess our own level of numbness? Right? We understand that construct from a physical standpoint. That's one of those symptoms where people say, well, are you experiencing numbness in your fingers or whatever it is? You can tell when that happens.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm sure there are people that would adjust over time. how do we assess our own spiritual numbness? And how do we, I asked you a similar question last week. We're probably not going to experience something in our Western society anytime soon where we are being chased by, an occupying government and threatened with crucifixion and stuff like that. So how do we then self-evaluate? And then how do we overcome it, create that courage? What's the process?
I'll be curious on your thoughts on this too. I think there's a whole bunch of different avenues for that. I'll take some personal responsibility here for preachers in general. We have to stop communicating that the resurrection is the grand totaled end of the story. That's a major mistake that I think we've sort of built into the narrative of lots of believers all throughout the States, is that everything kind of apexes on the resurrection. It kind of feels like it's all done.
Jesus conquered death.
Yes, which is true, and I believe it with all my heart.
Right.
But the fact is that we articulate this in such a way as if heaven and sort of beating death and or saving souls is kind of the end of the game. When in reality, the resurrection is the beginning. It's the jump off point for the phase of life in which God calls the church to, right?
Right. To an indeterminate amount of time.
Yes, and we have not professed that to our congregants nearly as we should. Like, we just haven't. So here's what's interesting. I almost, and at some point I'll probably reference it, one of my favorite people to embody all three of these points in one fell swoop was when Mary, right before Jesus goes to Jerusalem for Palm Sunday, Mary takes a very expensive bit of perfume, busts it open, pours it out on him, and then proceeds to wipe his body down with her hair.
Right.
And in that moment, she experiences all three of these points in real time, like real boots on the ground, normal everyday life stuff. She didn't get a pulpit somewhere. She didn't hold a picket sign outside. She didn't do all the things people leap to when they say, oh, we can't do that. No, she did a real costly, in the moment thing where Judas himself is panicked and freaking out. You could have done something legitimate. You could have used that money and gone and made real impact. But in one fell swoop, she showed deep devotion. She showed serious discipline to take all the loss on herself to make special care of his body, of the thing that which mattered most to her. And then last, she declared very clearly who she believed he was. He was worth everything she had. He was worth all of it. And so no one is expecting the average everyday person to get up and fit a bizarre mold. But this is a great framework by which we ought to be seeing our everyday lives. If we believe the resurrection, if we believe it in the same way that I believe Mary believed Jesus was in fact the Messiah and she was ready to hedge all her bets, that should be known among us. I mean, wouldn't you say the same? And I really am curious from someone who is not a, professional clergy person who's not sitting behind a pulpit all the time. Would you
Right.
not argue that there should be some legitimate distinguishing marks in ways that we can really qualify in real life?
Well, sure. But again, because you're talking about an audience that has maybe kind of a similar response, there's a few amens, right? And there is work that is done. But again, it fits within our life, right?
Yeah.
There are fewer people that were like, I was really inspired by the sermon this morning. I'm going to go sell all my possessions and give them to the poor. Or, you know what? I'm just going to go get on a boat and just, go to some place that I just heard on the news is, in crisis, and I'm just going to serve. Or, you know what? Right now, I'm going to go home and I'm just going to start walking up and down the street and knocking on doors and asking people whether or not, they have any prayer requests. That's probably a little closer to whatever. But if I'm honest, I don't know if fear is the right word, but I'll go ahead and just say, I'm afraid to do that. Either I'm afraid or I'm just lazy. I don't know which is which. Maybe it's both, but the impact is the same.
Because I'm always curious about that. Like, by no means, like even when you read the scriptures or church history for that matter, surely not everybody was doing that, but some were.
Right.
And do we hear even stories of a few that is the Lord not calling anybody to these extreme acts anymore? Like, it's a question I wonder about a lot.
Well, I think they are, but again, I think people do know of people that are sacrificial, right?
But like that? Like, can you think of a single person that gets off work, walks to the front door and says, I'm just going to go knock on my neighbor's door and I'm just going to ask him today, like, hey, I know this is off-putting, but can we talk about something real for a moment? And then just lay it out there for them. Do we know people who pull their car on the side of the road and see people struggling in the gutter and do whatever it takes as a good Samaritan to pull them out of the gutter at all expense to themselves? Do we actually see those extreme acts anymore?
I think we see parts of it.
Okay.
Yeah. I do know people that have been like very devoted to, say, a person who is a train wreck.
Sure.
Right? Tons of phone calls and picking them up from places and bringing them stuff and over and fail, and just seem to be no progress in where they're going. Right?
Yeah.
I think about somebody like a Shane Claiborne,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who some people consider to just be a weirdo in terms of stuff. But
I would agree.
But I give him credit in that he does some stuff where, like, look, if you're going to be serious about, say the clothing industry.
Yeah.
Right. You got to go all the way.
Make some clothes.
Right. Yeah. You can't just say, oh, well, I'll do, I won't shop at the really expensive places. I'll shop here, or I'll shop there, or I'll donate some clothes to people who are needy. Those are all good things.
Yeah.
Right. But he's like, no, you got to just go all the way, and you have to drive a car that's driven, that's fueled by donut grease, and you've got to, grow a garden in the backyard, and you got to try to live on it and that sort of thing. So I think there are people like him.
Mm-hmm.
He is, for me, he's kind of the John the Baptist, wild hair, living in the wilderness type of thing, eating wild honey.
Man, what an accolade, huh?
Well, it is. Yeah. But I mean, similar in terms of like people looking and going, whoa.
Yeah.
He's a little out there.
Right.
A little crazy.
Yeah. Odd that the church would find it extreme, since we're very familiar with his behavior, but
sure. And
it is nonetheless.
Right. And again, it's not so much about just praising him, because even he, you've read some of his stuff and I've read his stuff too. And he has even said, I don't want to be praised. I would be uncomfortable being praised for doing this. He says exactly the same thing you do. He reads it as, this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess part of it is, that is the sort of the challenge, is the declaration, because declaration can inspire, but it can also freak people out.
Mm-hmm.
You start talking, you start saying, hey, let's do this. People are like, that sounds great. And let me get back to you on that.
Yeah.
I got to go now.
Yep.
So
I would say, and I really do. I pray this for our people to the depths of my heart. Let's be called fools, and let's be called fools for the most foolish thing ever, that Christ did die and did rise to life. Like, let it be that way.
Well, let's leave it there.
Yeah.
So thanks again for joining us in Sermon Rewind. And on behalf of Jordan and myself, maybe be a little foolish this week and see where that goes. Thanks again for joining us on Sermon Rewind.
See you soon.